Hey guys, this is Eric Weingartner with Weingartner Racing. Please ignore my voice. I've got a bit of the flu going on, so please bear with me on this. This video is kind of like a blast from the past. What these heads here are the World Sportsman 2 heads. They don't even have them, like nothing on them at the ends. They used to be called Dart 2s as well, and I don't know the full history as far as the origins of these heads. All I know is when I first saw them. So here's a little background, I guess, for you. Way back in like 97, whenever I started driving, and well, I drove before that. But anyway, about 97, I got my first Jegs catalog, and I remember seeing these heads in there. And they were like the aftermarket head to get, because yes, there were some aluminum heads in there, but even back then, if I remember right, the Brodix heads were like $1,200. And I want to say these were like $7. Well, $1,200 in 97 was a ton of money. A ton of money. And at that time, there really wasn't any Chinese heads out there either. So you either had factory stuff, so what most people ran was double humps. And at the time, the Vortec heads were out, which were better than the double humps, but they were still using the vehicles. So unless someone totaled a vehicle or something, those Vortec heads were really rare because they were on new cars being driven. So mostly double humps. So aftermarket stuff, of course, you had Brodix, you had some Dart hadn't really come out with their Iron Eagles yet. So this was it. This was the Sportsman 2. So these predated the Iron Eagles even. So as far as they went, they were cheapest. I remember seeing a Jegs catalog said 202, 1/600 valves. We'll accept up to a 210 intake valve, 1/600. I had no idea about cylinder heads at all back then, any at all, as far as how much effort it takes to make them that. Because back in those days, not everybody had a form cutter to cut out valve jobs. So the machine shop I even went to, they used stones to cut their valve jobs. So in order to go from a 202, where this is, to a 210, you'd have to use a stone. You'd be grinding forever. And I feel bad for the people that did it back then. Anyway, of course, some people still did have form cutters so they could cut it out much quicker, like what we have now, but huge deal. But anyway, point being is these heads were the ticket. They were supposed to be amazing. Far better than what the double humps were, and the Vortec were still coming on the scene, so they're supposed to be better than those. So I have flown some before in the past, but of course that was way before YouTube, so I didn't make a video. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and flow these and share these with you. I'm gonna give you a couple of views just so you can kind of see. These are actually the 202 1/600 version. They're not cut out to bigger valves. These are exactly how they are from the factory, and I'll go through a couple little things with you. So let me move my light a little bit, and we can look down at stuff. You can see how big that guide boss is. Let me get my pointer out. Should have prepared better. Yeah, I know. All right, here we go. You can see how big the guide boss is. So like when people used to port, we would knock that down, obviously. But if you notice something else, there's no bronze. There's no bronze guides. These are through cast iron. So the guides themselves are actually cast, or not cast into the head, I guess, but then they're also reamed for it. So there was no pressed in guides like you have on modern heads, period. So that's one thing. Now, it does cut down on cost having it this way, but if these wear out, you have to ream these out to put in a guide itself, or you can do a K-liner. But there's a big old bulge here because they knew they had to do that. This would probably be the beginning of a burr finish, starts with these heads. So if you look at this, you're like, no, it's not burr finish. This is whenever people talked about having rough finishes. Look at this. And the casting flash, they would knock out stuff. You guys today have no idea how bad the castings used to be, as you can clearly see. And this was, by the way, one of the better ones. You can see a lot of factory stuff is far worse, like huge boogers of cast iron just in it. So this is what I mean, a little rough. Chambers are rough, everything's rough. So this is, if you ever wonder why did people in the 60 grit smooth finish take off, it's because they got seeing this so often, and as bad as it was like, there's no way this helps flow. So anyway, there's that view. Let me go ahead and change a couple other views. By the way, since they're cast iron, they use tapered guides. They did have angle plugs, and to my knowledge, back in the time, only the 492, I want to say, double humps had an angle plug. So getting an angle plug would be pretty rare. And I remember I was thinking, I was like, oh, that's a ticket. It makes so much more power. I don't think it does nothing. But anyway, that was kind of a cool deal. Flipping these heavy things over. There's your intake ports. They're not that bad as far as alignment. So that's pretty good. And you can see the top view here, and this is your back view. You can see the exhaust ports are square. They're much bigger than stock, so that's not bad. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and put them on a flow bench, flow them on a 430 bore. Okay, here it is all set up on the bench. 4030 bore, radius entry, normal stuff. I forgot two part of this that I should have mentioned about this head. The intake runners themselves are a 200cc version, which back when these came out, that was huge because double humps are like 165 and the Vortex are 176. But these were offered in two versions, and I totally forgot to tell you this. This one is the 72cc version chamber. So actually they had a 64cc. I don't know why anybody would ever buy the 72, but someone did, and that's what happened to be here now. But the 64cc were definitely the ticket because back in the time, any of the stock heads were like 76cc's. So just changing that to like the 64cc stuff, you bumped your compression ratio up a lot and you gained more power that way, forgetting about anything to do with flow. So pretty big deal. But anyway, let's look at the flow numbers. So remember, 200cc runner, 72cc chamber. And the valves, that's a Ferrea valve that's in there. It's got a 30-degree back cut. It's got a Brodix exhaust valve, and that's got a 30-degree back cut too. So a pretty good representation of what you would use. That intake valve is not really a trick, but it's pretty common. It's a 6000 series, pretty easy. So anyway, let's look at them. As you can tell, it ain't setting the world on fire. At 400, you have 209, and it peaks at 230 at 900. But it climbs the whole way. Exhaust flow is pretty weak. I mean, peaking at 142. This is without an exhaust pipe, obviously. So you might be asking yourself, that sucks. Remember, when these came out, they really were pretty amazing. Because double humps flow about 212 out of the box, And just for the record, because you know you're going to ask this, what about Vortex, though? Well, these are Keith, the guy that works for me. We did a 3-angle valve job and flowed these. So these aren't exactly stock. 3-angle valve job and a radius on the exhaust. And you can tell his went 218. These are 906s, by the way, Vortex. His went 218, which is about 10 CFM higher than these Sportsman 2s. And his went 241 at 480, but then, of course, it backed up. So if you look at these numbers, it's real close to those, even though those are a little bit higher. The exhaust, this is probably because of the radius seat being cut. It is a little bit better than that. Stock, these really are really close to what a true stock Vortex is. However, if you did a valve job, it's a little bit better. So you might say, well, why ever get these? These are so much better, because I'm sure you guys have all heard this. If I get the same flow, so Vortex, stock Vortex flow about this. So if I get the same flow from a smaller CC head, it should make more power. That is yes and no. So here's what I mean by that. If you get the same flow from a 176cc runner, so we're going to, both of them the same length, so we're going to assume that the cross sections are the same. So we're just going to stick with that. If you get the same flow from a smaller runner, you will have more power at a lower RPM range. At a higher RPM range, the larger runner is still going to make more power because it has more area to support the higher RPM. So flow is only one part of it. So everybody looks at the flow and like, I would pick the head, the smaller one. Well, that's great if you're looking in the smaller RPM range. So if you were to stick these, in other words, let's say you were more of an all-out deal and you're trying to turn 7,500 versus the Vortex will make plenty of power below 6,000 better than these and more torque, but above, in the 7,000, 7,500 RPM range, these are going to be better, even though they have a bigger runner and flow the same. You're like, well, the velocity is slower. It is at the lower RPM. At the higher RPM, it's where it needs to be, and the Vortex are too fast because you can have too fast velocity. So anyway, just something to think about. But for most people that are getting these anyway, you're probably using them on a street deal, and still miles better than the double humps. Vortex, you're going to be about the same, because even 176 to 200 cc runners, honestly, the Vortex is going to still make more torque and horsepower at the lower RPMs. But if you're racing it, I bet you these still beat it. So it feel faster on the Vortex. On the track, these are probably better. You probably get a quicker ET. Like, that's impossible. No, it's truth. But it's still not fantastic. It just is. However, I will say, this is where headquarters kind of took off, because once you port these, they're going to go with a 300 range easy. Not easy, but quite a bit of work, because cast iron sucks. That's really tough to do with the Vortex. It can be done, but it's much harder. But once you port these, no Vortex typically touches it, nor double humps. And that's just the way it was. So you can almost think like they planned whenever they sold these heads that you're going to touch them and make them better. But anyway, thanks for watching. Remember, I'm no Superman. You guys take care.